in today's video, I'm going to be doing a best build and PvP tips for Divine Beasts DEINOSUCHUS. Yes, that's right, Orca's Boar's doing a best build video. Anyway, welcome back to the channel, friends. And let me just get a few things out of the way with first. This video is going to be split up into sections, starting off with subspecies and abilities. Then I'm going to be moving on to land combat and then water combat. So hopefully it'll be nice and split up for you. Also, a lot of people have been asking this, but since it got its downsize, have any of its stats changed? No. I'm not going to get into that with this video, but I'll probably write something in the description if you want to have a look at that. Anyway, further ado, let's get straight into this. When it comes to subspecies, they don't do too much. There's not a big difference. It's usually less than 10% in any changes. However, DEINOSUCHUS, it has a couple of funny subs. This is the default one. But when it comes to actual combat, the ones that you really want to look at is the Schwimmery, Mississippensis, and Purosaurus. That is because these three just give the best buffs and, have little drawbacks. I'll start with the Schwimmery. 3% armor, 3% attack. No downsides, not a single one. Mississippensis, 8% armor, minus 4% speed. That's not too bad. Purosaurus, 5% attack, 10% bone break, and minus 5% speed. The bonuses and, it's not that bad. It's pretty good. However, since I'm doing general combat, I would say you want to use Schwimmery because it has, 3% armor, 3% attack, and overall it's pretty good. Now for the land abilities. Remember I said I was going to split this up? This is the land ability section. So, what you're going to want to use for land combat is Bite, Shell Crusher, Ambush, Directional Bite, and Endurant Hide and Tail Attack. You do not need anything else on this thing. That is all you need. So let me just, go through it and explain it all. So, Bite, you obviously want to use Bite because it's a good bite. And then Shell Crusher, you want to use Shell Crusher because it ignores armor and combat weight, does 120 damage, and, it's pretty good. It's got a 15-second cooldown, 0 stam cost, and it doesn't even share cooldown with any other bites. Unlike Shattering Snap. A lot of people use this, don't use it, it's bad. The fracture's not worth it, the stam cost isn't worth it, the charge up time isn't worth it, and it shares a cooldown with the default bite. So as soon as you use this, you can't even bite for 5 seconds. It sucks. Don't use this one. Use Shell Crusher instead. It is so much better. And when it comes to senses, Ambush is just by far the best one. You can use it anywhere. Land, water, anywhere, any time of the day, it doesn't matter, unlike this one and this one. So, Crepuscular, you can only use it at nighttime. It is pretty good, but only good at nighttime. And Drench Blows, only good in the water. I'll probably use that for the water build, but that'll be later. So, you want to use Ambush. And then the Directional Bite, it provides very good turning, because it's a whole 90 degrees you can basically instant do, does about the same damage as the default bite, and it doesn't even cost a lot of stamina. Diets, they don't do anything, and Endurant Hide, this is the hide you want to use. More trot speed, more stamina. This allows you to do more turn bites and trot quicker, because the main reason you want more trot speed is because you don't sprint in combat, but I'll get into that later on. And you want to use the tail attack. So the tail attack does good damage, good knockback, and it's got pretty good range because this thing has a long tail. Anyway, with the abilities and subspecies out the way with, we can get onto how to actually use this thing on land for PvP. So the way you want to, start your fights is a bit different. Normally you would run at your opponent or voice buff. You don't do either of those things here. Do not sprint, and it has no voice buffs. You want to trot. Now this is for a main reason, as this thing doesn't regenerate stamina on land unless it sits or sleeps. I will get into a little bit more later on. However, for now, just stick to trotting. It is so good, especially with this hide. This is slightly slower than Tyranititan, and that's a bipedal apex, so this thing, pretty good trot speed. Now, after you started your fight by trotting towards your opponent, what are you going to do next? Well, you want to hit them with a shell crusher first, taking advantage of your ambush sense. I'm going to pretend this rock is a player. You would trot to them, hit them with shell crusher, and then default bite. And let's say your opponent tries to turn around you, so they're now on my side. Oh no, I directional bite, and I can keep biting them. You know, that is how you want to start land combat with this thing. Let's say you're a bit more into the fight, and they manage to wiggle their way to get behind you. Oh no, what do I do? Normally, you would just try and turn, but let's say they can turn quicker than you. What do? Well, you would hit them with a tail attack, and then quickly pivot and do the directional bite to get a good 180 degree turn. You know, the bite's only 90, you gotta do the other 90 degrees on your own. But if you hit them with that tail, it will push them back, so you have more time and space to do the full turn. And then you can continue with shell crusher, regular bite, and maybe, if you time it perfectly, you know, we'll hit them with the tail attack. They'll run back. You could maybe even hit them with that directional bite. That would be insane. You would do a lot of damage, and they would probably, you know, not want to try and do that again. However, you do always have to be careful. If you mess up your directional bite, you turn the wrong way, let's say they're on your left and you go right, you are basically screwed for a big chunk of this fight because they are behind you and you have to wait until you can actually turn again. Now, when I mentioned no sprinting, do not sprint on this thing. Never sprint unless your opponent has no stamina and they're on one shot from death, you know, death scars. Then you can sprint. However, in the fight, do not sprint because this thing does not regen stamina unless you sit or sleep. Now, if you're very crafty, you could do what I'm doing right now, which, you know, it just looks like my idol, but I spread my legs a little bit. Some people don't catch on. This lets you heal your bleed and regen your stamina pretty well. It's quite nice actually. However, the main reason for stamina is so you can do your directional bite. That bite carries this thing on land. It is the entire reason you don't get tail ridden to death by 2 slots. Because it catches them off guard and it just provides such a good turning. So that is basically land combat out the way with, you know. I play it exactly how I've just mentioned, and I can kill Spinosaurus, Tyranotitan, even T-Rex. And T-Rex can straight up just face tank this thing. But, you know, you manage to maneuver your way, you know, do a bit of ducks. I did complain about this, but, you know, you can still do it. And eventually, you know, some of you guys might be killing T-Rexes too. Anyway, so that is land combat out the way with. Now let's go over to aquatic combat. Alrighty, so starting off with aquatic combat. Now, instantly you can see I am the same subspecies, despite there being subs specifically for water combat. This is mainly because although they do better in the water, they're just not practical. Having to change subspecies just to go from land to water, it's not practical, I do not recommend it. However, now we get onto the actual water abilities. So, when it comes to water combat, you want thermal pressure sensors, because if it's foggy, you can see stuff that's in front of you. You want drench blows because of the damage. The bites are the same. You can't use turn bite. Your hide is the same because it gives you more stamina. And then you want to use the lunge, not the ambush. The ambush grabs stuff, it does low damage and grabs and wastes a lot of stamina and has a long cooldown. Lunge, however, does good speed, good bite, damage, and does a little bit of fracture or bone break, I'm not too sure. But overall, this one is better for water combat. And then you want to have death roll in case you actually do grab anything, you know, just in case. This one doesn't do much damage, but it drains away stamina and oxygen. So, I guess if you do grab something, maybe have fun with death roll. Then you have tail attack. To be honest, you could even pair death roll with clamp if you grab like a dolphin or something. Just throwing that out there. And then you just want to have your tail attack, as I mentioned. Start combat in the water as DEINOSUCHUS is, first of all, use this call, and it will give you a little radar. Now I have come into like the clearest water, but let's say I'm in Grand Plains River. God, that was hard. And it's, you know, completely foggy. I can't see at all. This radar will show me stuff in front of me, in my direct line of sight. Carnivore, herbivore, food, bodies, whatever. It lets you see better for a good full minute. So you want to use that. And let's pretend there is a Mosasaurus in front of me. Now, the way you would start a fight with this thing is you would do the green lunge, the one that's on my X button. You can see the regular lunge. It's not ambush, it's lunge. It's got the, little mouth that's open, it's green. You want to use that one. And you would start it like this. It does a pretty good lunge, not too much stamina consumed, and, a good distance. You can ambush things from far away. And mixing that in with drench blows, you do a lot of damage. So you want to do that first to start the fight, and because we're in water you can also sprint now, unlike on land, because you regen stamina in the water whilst trotting. So, you want to do that lunge. I'll do it again just to showcase it. You want to do this lunge, and then follow it up with a shell crusher, and that is instantly over 200 damage done. And then you just want to follow it with the bites, And let's say your opponent is better at swimming and they get behind you. Let's say it's a Spinosaurus and it gets behind me. Well, you would tail attack and turn in an opposite direction. So you would turn this way, tail attack, and then turn this way to kind of trick them out a little bit. You don't have to do that, but it sometimes does work. Sometimes you can just tail attack like normal and do it. But then there's a high chance you might miss your tail attack. And, I just prefer doing a bit of trickery, some tomfoolery as some would say. And it's pretty good, it works decently well. But as long as you keep your opponent not behind you, but as long as you keep them in front of you, and try to maybe dodge some bites, you should be able to win most predicaments. You will struggle against Mosasaurus, Leviathan obviously as well, but, DB doesn't balance against a giant whale. But you will struggle against Mosa a little bit because of its speed and its power. However, if you play this really well, you hit that lunge, you hit the shell crusher, and you keep going, you play pretty much pristine, you can probably just face tank the Mosa, realistically. With how powerful Deinosuchus is, you could probably do that. So, there's not too much for water combat, it's very simple, because you don't need to worry too much about what abilities to actually use. It's very straightforward. Use this once, that is it, just use it once at the start. Shell crusher, bite, tail attacks, You can use the lunge if you really need to get out of a situation. So let's say there is something behind me, let's just say it's a Spino, I'm low and I can't turn around to fight it. I could lunge away from it. That is a possibility, you can do that, that is useful. But in terms of actual combat, you only really want to use it once. That is basically all I can really give you guys for when it comes to tips with DB's Deinosuchus. We've gone over subspecies and some of the stats, as well as land and water combat, and also the builds. So that's all I can really give you. So if you found this video informational or helpful, make sure to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment down below if you feel like it. I do like reading your comments, they are fantastic. I'm only doing this video because I got a comment that mentioned it. I was like, that's a good idea. So I will just repeat, the stats haven't changed, the vanilla combat weight and stuff exactly the same. The grab weight was changed from 4,500 to lower, but that was before this change. So you can't grab Deinosuchus, unlucky. You can't even grab a Marga, that thing's too heavy. But I'm gonna leave this video here. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.